And Ed, would you be willing to pull those doors closed, please? Okay, one of the questions that was raised is this, and anyone who would like can jump in. How important do you think it is to distinguish between institutional Adventism and the critical core of biblical faith, between cultural Adventism and truth? Maybe you can forget the truth question, because that is a very large one. But what about institutional Adventism and core biblical faith? Should those be distinguished? If so, how?
Analytically, I distinguish between them. But most of us establish an identity in the context of culture and in the context of community. So there isn't an Adventist who is Adventist in isolation. And there isn't an Adventist who is only an Adventist because of the Bible, even if they come to some kind of intellectual assent to what they later discover is Adventist teaching. Then they join a congregation, or they connect to some aspect of Adventist media, whether that is independent through ABN or the Hope Channel or whatever, or they become subscribers of Adventist literature. But at some level, they move from the individual experience and understanding of the faith into something that is social and culturally mediated. So I think, yes, they are different things. The institution, from the GC through the conferences and unions, what have you, that's different from our lived experience of the faith through our churches and congregations and colleges. But
I find that rich, because often people will distinguish between following the Bible and what's going on in the church. And I hear you say that is following the Bible is abstract. We follow the Bible not on top of a pole somewhere, but as a community.
Yes, and when we, especially as Adventists, we have an inclination to say we're following the Bible. When we're following the Bible as interpreted by the GC and the Biblical Research Institute and the various books that have interpreted the Bible for us through our tradition.
Okay, would anybody else like to jump in on this question of the institutional church and biblical faith?
I mean, for me, I'll just jump in here really fast. I think for me, people have asked, why did you say you were, living a year without God? Why not just step away from the church? Isn't it really the church that you're upset with? And my response to that so far has been, I don't have any unmediated experience of God. Like, I don't even know what that would be. Like, how would you experience God without mediating that through a lived experience of some kind, which is what I kind of hear you saying. So, especially as a pastor, I've never been a church member since I was 16, I guess. I've just been a pastor. I mean, I haven't had a Sabbath where I wasn't working, that whole time. So I think for me, the experience of God and the experience of community, shared community experience of the divine or God's calling in our lives has been all one thing. So it's hard. You can't, analytically you can separate them, but I think in your lived experience it's very difficult to say, so today I will give up on religion, but I'm going to still believe in God. And my question would be, what is that? What God are you talking? Like, what's that actually mean? I don't even have a concept of that.
I think maybe my answer would be a little bit different than either of the previous two panelists, because for me, like I said, I didn't grow up Adventist. My family's not Adventist. I have a lot of non-Adventist friends. And for me, like when people would talk about cultural Adventism, I was always like, what do you mean? Like, I understand the fact that there is a subculture of Adventism, but I guess because Adventism is not, it is one realm of myself, but it isn't the only realm, I feel like I can sort of distinguish a little bit more between my faith as an Adventist and being someone who is a person of faith even outside of the institution. because I know that even in speaking to some people who felt like they wanted to leave the church, I know a lot of people who say, well, I couldn't leave the church because I have all these people, like they have a lot of familial roots and they have a lot of social roots. And I do obviously have lots of friends and people who I love and care about who are Adventists, but I guess I've always felt that if for some reason I would have to or felt compelled to leave Adventism, I wouldn't feel isolated because I have so much more of my life and people of my life who aren't Adventists that I don't think that it would be, I wouldn't say that it's not a loss, because there is a part of that is a loss, but I think that it's a lot different for someone who, that this is their experience holistically, as opposed to someone who might have come into Adventism and still has sort of an outside life, you know what I mean? So, and I don't know if Syd, because I know that you were not raised Adventist either. I don't know if that's similar or different than what you would say.
I don't want to exhaust the question, but yeah, it's similar. I think the question itself is interesting because my thought, honestly, is that if Adventism were able to contain more, that we wouldn't have to ask that question. And someone recently told me that, we think of tolerance as this thing where we like celebrate, and it's so fun, and we take joy in all this diversity, and but that it comes from the root tolera, which means to bear the burden of difference. And so it's actually quite, it can be joyful, but it's quite a heavy load. And so this having to decide, like, is it cultural Adventism or our faith or whatever? Like, I think if Adventism were a bit broader, which it is broad, but even if it could contain more, we wouldn't have to be like, this is a church thing, this is a faith thing, this is, that's just my thought.
Okay, another question is, and I just overheard that Monty evidently wasn't feeling good, did go to the bathroom and soiled his clothes.